Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable people get when they're left alone? The silence feels heavy. The air feels strange, and suddenly they're reaching for their phone, scrolling endlessly just to fill the void. Because being alone scares most people. They think it means rejection. They think it means nobody cares. They think it means they're missing out. But what if I told you that being alone is not a weakness? It's a hidden strength. What if I told you that the very thing you run from is the very thing that could change your life forever? Think about it. Every breakthrough you've ever had in your life, every deep realization, every tough decision, you didn't make it in the crowd. You made it when it was just you, your thoughts, and the silence. And that silence is not empty. It's full of answers. It's full of power. But most people are too distracted, too afraid, too dependent to ever unlock it. You see, there is a difference between being lonely and being alone. Loneliness is when you feel empty because you're missing someone else. But being alone, that's where you discover you don't actually need anyone to validate your worth. That's where you learn who you are, what you're capable of, and what you truly want from this life. And once you learn how to stand strong on your own, no one can take that power away from you. So tonight, I'm not here to tell you how to surround yourself with more people. I'm not here to tell you how to be liked or how to fit in. I'm here to challenge you to do something far more powerful, to embrace the silence, to stand in solitude, and to realize that being alone is not your weakness. It is your greatest weapon. When you strip away the noise of the world, when you're not surrounded by voices telling you what to do, who to be, how to act, you begin to see yourself for the very first time. That's the gift of aloneness. And yet most people spend their entire lives running from it. They jump from one relationship to another. They drown themselves in constant conversation. They cling to friendships, not because they are healthy, but because they're terrified of silence. But here's the truth. The moment you learn to stand alone is the moment you begin to meet the real you. Ask yourself right now, who are you when no one is watching? Not the person you pretend to be on social media, not the version of you that performs at work or around friends. I mean, the person who exists in the quiet, in the stillness, when the masks come off, that's your identity. And if you don't spend time alone, you'll never discover it. You'll live your entire life as a shadow of everyone else's opinions. Being alone forces you to confront yourself. And let's be honest, that's uncomfortable. Because in solitude, you can't hide. The insecurities, the fears, the unhealed wounds, they all rise to the surface. And most people don't want to face that. So they run back to the crowd. But here's the thing. Those uncomfortable truths are the very things that will shape you into who you're meant to become. Alone is where you heal. Alone is where you grow. Alone is where you begin to take back your identity from a world that's constantly trying to rewrite it. Think about it. How many of your choices are really yours? How much of your life is built on what others expected of you? Maybe your parents had a dream for you, so you followed it even though it wasn't yours. Maybe society told you how you should look, how much money you should make, what kind of relationship you should be in, and you followed that script. But when you are alone, you begin to ask deeper questions. Do I actually want this? Or was I told to want it? Do I believe this? Or was I conditioned to believe it? Those questions are terrifying, because the answers might dismantle the life you've been living. But that's also where your true identity is born. Some of the strongest people you will ever meet are those who've mastered solitude. They're not swayed by trends. They're not desperate for validation. They don't live their lives trying to impress strangers. Why? Because they know who they are. They spent the time in silence figuring it out. And once you know who you are, the world cannot manipulate you. Let me give you a hard truth. If you can't sit alone with yourself for an hour without feeling restless, anxious, or uncomfortable, that's not boredom, that's avoidance. That means there are things inside you that you haven't faced yet, and until you do, your identity will always be shaped by fear. But once you lean into that silence, once you embrace it instead of running from it, you begin to hear your own voice. Not the voice of fear, not the voice of others, but your own inner compass. History shows us this again and again. Great thinkers, leaders, and innovators, they didn't find their vision in the crowd. They found it in solitude, Alone is where the poet writes, where the inventor creates, where the leader forms clarity of thought. Alone is where you disconnect from the noise long enough to see the bigger picture. And let's get real. Being alone doesn't mean isolating forever. It doesn't mean rejecting people or living in bitterness. It means being grounded enough in your identity that you don't lose yourself when others walk into your life. Too many people lose their sense of self in relationships. They mold themselves to fit what others want. They forget their own dreams, their own needs, their own voice. But when you have already built your identity in solitude, you don't bend, you don't shrink, you don't compromise who you are just to be accepted. Here's something I want you to remember. People come and go. Friends change. Relationships end. Even family shifts. If your identity is tied to them, you will always be at risk of losing yourself. But if your identity is built alone, in the quiet, no one can take it from you. That is freedom. That is power. Maybe right now you feel lost. Maybe you've been surrounded by people your whole life, yet deep down you don't even know yourself. That's not failure, that's an invitation. It's an invitation to step back, to retreat into the silence, to face the discomfort of being alone, and to discover the person you were meant to be all along. Because the truth is, you cannot build a strong identity if you're always leaning on others. You build it when you stand alone, when you face your reflection and decide this is who I am, and I am enough. So, the next time you feel that urge to run from solitude, pause. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of discovering? Because that answer will lead you to your true self. And once you know your true self, you will stop chasing approval, you will stop fearing rejection, and you will walk through life with a confidence that cannot be shaken. That is the power of being alone. It's not emptiness, it's identity. It's not punishment, it's preparation. And the moment you embrace it, you'll realize that everything you've been searching for outside of you has been waiting for you inside, all along. When you learn to be alone, you also learn to be unshakable. There is a resilience that comes from solitude, a toughness that no one can fake. Because when it's just you, when there's no hand to hold, no one to lean on, no voice to reassure you, you discover a strength you didn't even know you had. And that strength doesn't come from comfort. It comes from struggle. It comes from silence. It comes from moments when you thought you were breaking, but instead you were building. Most people think resilience is about pushing through when others cheer you on. That's not resilience, that's motivation. True resilience is when nobody sees your fight, when nobody claps for you, when you feel invisible, but you keep moving anyway. That's the resilience built in solitude. Think about the hardest times in your life. Maybe you lost someone. Maybe you were betrayed. Maybe you went through rejection, heartbreak, or failure. In those moments, people could comfort you. They could offer words. But at the end of the day, you were the one who had to carry yourself through the night. You were the one who had to wake up and face yourself in the mirror. And whether you realize it or not, those moments carved resilience into you. Alone, you either collapse or you rise. And if you choose to rise, you come out stronger than you've ever been. Here's the raw truth. The reason so many people fall apart when life hits them is because they never learned how to stand alone. They're addicted to external support. They rely on someone else to fix them, to validate them, to pick them back up. But when you train yourself to rely on your own strength and solitude, you become unstoppable. Because you know, even if every person walks out, even if no one believes in you, you can still stand. Being alone is a test of emotional endurance. At first, it feels heavy. The silence feels suffocating. You start questioning your worth. You wonder why no one is around. But then something shifts. You realize that your emotions don't control you. You control them. You realize that loneliness doesn't define you. It shapes you. You realize that you can sit in the discomfort and not break. And that realization is the foundation of emotional resilience. When you are alone, you don't have anyone to distract you from your pain. You can't bury your feelings under constant noise. You're forced to sit with them, to feel them, to process them. And as much as that hurts, it's the very process that makes you emotionally strong. Because strength doesn't come from ignoring pain. It comes from walking through it. Alone time forces you to confront your emotions, to name them, to deal with them. And once you do, they lose their power over you. Imagine this. If you can master your emotions in silence, if you can discipline your mind when no one is watching, then when the storm comes, when life throws betrayal, heartbreak, or disappointment at you, you won't fall apart. You've already trained for it in solitude. You've already built those emotional muscles. That's why some people crumble under pressure while others stand tall. The difference isn't talent or luck. The difference is resilience. And resilience is built when no one is around to rescue you. Yeah, I'll give you an example. Picture a soldier in training. If they always had someone else carrying their gear, helping them over obstacles, guiding them through every move, they'd never develop strength. But when they're forced to carry the load themselves, when they have to climb the wall alone, when they run until their legs give out and there's no one to lean on, that's when toughness is born. Life works the same way. Being alone is your training ground. It's where you learn how much you can actually endure. And let me tell you something, you can endure more than you think. The beauty of solitude is that it removes the safety net. And that might sound scary, but it's necessary. Because when you know you can survive without the net, you stop being afraid of falling. That's freedom. When you've spent nights alone crying, but you got back up. When you've sat in silence with heartbreak tearing you apart, but you healed. When you faced rejection with no one to reassure you, but you kept going. And that kind of resilience cannot be bought, borrowed, or faked. It's forged in solitude. And here's the most powerful part. Once you've built resilience alone, you carry it everywhere. You walk differently, you speak differently, you no longer fear losing people because you know you can stand without them. You no longer panic when plans fall apart because you've already trained your mind to adapt. You no longer crumble under criticism because you've already learned how to validate yourself. That's the gift of being alone. It doesn't just toughen you for the moment, it hardens you for life. So many people are terrified of heartbreak, of rejection, of failure. But do you want to know who's not terrified? The person who's been alone, who's felt those things in solitude and came out stronger. That person knows pain doesn't kill you, it builds you. That person knows silence isn't a punishment, it's preparation. That person knows solitude isn't emptiness, it's power. So the next time you find yourself standing alone, don't panic, don't rush to fill the silence, don't beg for company, just to feel complete. Sit in it, learn from it, use it, because every time you do, you're strengthening the one person who will never leave you. And that resilience, once it's built, will carry you through storms others can't survive. Being alone is not the enemy. It's the training ground of warriors. It's where your spirit toughens, your mind sharpens, and your emotions strengthen. And when you master it, you will walk through this world with a quiet confidence that no one can take away. That is resilience. That is power. One of the most powerful things about being alone is what it does for your focus. When you are constantly surrounded by people, by noise, by endless chatter and distractions, your attention is pulled in 100 different directions. You spend more time reacting to the world than building your own. But when you step into solitude, something happens. The noise fades, the chaos quiets, and for the first time, your mind has space to think clearly. That is where focus is born. Most people never experience deep focus because they're addicted to stimulation. They need the TV on, the phone buzzing, the music playing, conversations happening around them. They can't sit in silence because silence feels unbearable. But that silence is the very place where creativity, clarity, and growth happen. You cannot build anything extraordinary if your mind is constantly distracted. Alone time gives you the chance to lock in, to shut out the world, and to dive deep into what matters. Think about it. Every great invention, every powerful book, every breakthrough in history, where did it happen? Not at a crowded party, not in the middle of endless small talk. It happened when someone withdrew, when they spent hours alone, thinking, reflecting, building. Focus requires solitude. Growth requires solitude. Because when you are alone, you can finally hear yourself. Here's something most people don't realize. Growth isn't always about doing more. Sometimes it's about removing distractions so you can finally do what matters. When you're alone, you don't have to perform for anyone. You don't have to impress anyone. You don't have to constantly respond to other people's demands. You can sit with your own goals, your own plans, and give them the full attention they deserve. That's where growth begins. But let's be honest, growth in solitude isn't easy. When you're alone, your mind will try to trick you. It will tell you to pick up your phone, to scroll endlessly, to call someone, to find a way to escape the silence. That's because your brain isn't used to deep focus. It's addicted to easy distractions. But if you can push past that urge, if you can sit in the stillness and commit to your work, your growth will accelerate in ways you never imagined. Let me give you an example. Imagine a student who studies in a crowded coffee shop, surrounded by noise. They may feel productive, but their mind is divided. They're half listening to conversations, half focused on their books. Now imagine that same student alone in a quiet room. No distractions, no interruptions, just them and their work. In 1 hour, they can achieve more than they would in 3 hours, surrounded by noise. That's the power of focus born from solitude. Now apply that to your life. How many dreams have you put on hold because you've been too distracted? How many times have you said, I don't have time, when the truth is you had the time but not the focus? Being alone gives you that focus. It allows you to invest your energy into growth instead of scattering it across 1,000 meaningless distractions. And here's the truth. Growth requires sacrifice. You can't become your best self if you're constantly available to everyone else. You can't build a vision for your life if you're always consumed by other people's lives. That's why solitude is so powerful. It's not just about being alone, it's about reclaiming your energy, your time, and your focus so you can build something greater. There's also a deeper level to this. When you're alone, you can measure your growth honestly. In a crowd, it's easy to hide. It's easy to compare yourself to others and get lost in competition. But alone, there's no one else to measure against. It's just you against yesterday's version of you. Alone is where you ask, am I better today than I was last week? Have I grown? Have I moved forward? That self-accountability is what produces real growth. The world today tries to sell you the idea that you always need to be connected, that you always need to be surrounded, that you always need to be seen. But let me tell you something. The most powerful work is done when no one is watching. Alone is where you practice the skill that nobody knows about. Alone is where you draft the vision no one sees yet. Alone is where you put in the hours, the discipline, the sweat that will one day shock the world. People will look at your success and think it happened overnight, but you'll know the truth. It happened in silence, it happened in solitude. And here's the beautiful thing. The more time you spend alone, focusing and growing, the less you crave external approval, because you see your own progress. You don't need applause when you already know you're leveling up. You don't need validation when you can measure your own growth. That kind of independence is rare, and it's priceless. So if you feel like your life is stuck, if you feel like you're not moving forward, ask yourself, how much time are you really giving to yourself? Not to social media, not to friends, not to endless noise, to yourself. Because if the answer is almost none, then there's your solution. You don't need more hours in the day. You need more focus. And focus is born when you embrace being alone. Remember this. A distracted mind builds nothing, but a focused mind can change the world. Alone time is not wasted time. It's where your growth compounds. It's where your vision becomes clear. It's where you transform into the kind of person who doesn't just talk about goals, but achieves them. So don't fear solitude. Use it, protect it, value it, because being alone is not the absence of growth. It is the foundation of it. And the moment you embrace that, you will realize that everything you've been waiting for is waiting for you in the quiet, where focus lives and where growth thrives. One of the most underrated powers of being alone is that it changes the way you see people. When you learn to be comfortable in your own company, you no longer grab onto anyone just to fill a void. You stop clinging to relationships out of fear, and you start choosing them out of strength. And that is one of the most liberating shifts you can ever experience. See, most people stay in toxic relationships not because they love the person, but because they're afraid of being alone. They settle for disrespect, for half effort, for pain that chips away at them, all because the idea of solitude feels scarier than mistreatment. But when you master being alone, when you know you can stand by yourself, you no longer tolerate what doesn't serve you. You don't beg for attention. You don't chase validation. You don't shrink yourself just to keep someone around. You filter, you choose, you demand better. Let's get brutally honest here. If you can't stand being alone, you will always be a prisoner of unhealthy relationships. You'll always accept crumbs. You'll always overextend yourself. You'll always try to prove your worth. But once you learn to thrive in solitude, your entire perspective changes. Suddenly, you don't need people. You choose people. And the people you choose are very different when you're not desperate. Think about the friendships in your life. How many of them are real? How many of them would still exist if you weren't the one constantly reaching out, constantly giving, constantly compromising? Being alone teaches you this, because when you step back, when you stop pouring into everyone else for a while, you quickly see who notices your absence. You see who checks in. You see who values you. The ones who disappear, they were never meant to stay. And that's okay, because aloneness reveals that truth. The same goes for romantic relationships. People often stay with partners who mistreat them because they fear solitude more than they fear being broken. They'd rather have a warm body next to them than face an empty room. But when you become comfortable in your own presence, when you've built a life that feels full, even without someone else, you no longer accept love that hurts. You stop confusing attention with affection. You stop settling for someone just because they fill space. You realize that being alone and at peace is far better than being together and miserable. Here's something powerful to remember. Aloneness isn't just about removing the wrong people. It's about making space for the right ones. When you're no longer desperate, when you're no longer clinging, you allow your energy to attract people who align with your values. Stronger relationships find you because you're no longer broadcasting insecurity. You're broadcasting strength, and strong people are drawn to strength. I want you to think about this. How many times have you compromised your values just to keep someone? How many times have you silenced your voice, ignored your intuition, or played small so someone else wouldn't leave? That is what happens when you fear being alone. But when you embrace solitude, when you see it as power instead of punishment, you refuse to lose yourself for anyone. You stop bending until you break. You walk into every relationship as a whole person, not a half waiting to be completed. And here's the truth most people don't want to face. Some people are only in your life because you allow them to be. They drain you, they use you, they belittle you, but they stay because you're too afraid to cut them off. Alone time fixes that. Because once you realize you're strong enough on your own, you start removing those leeches without hesitation. You stop asking, what if I end up alone? And you start asking, why would I stay where I'm not valued? That's when your circle changes. That's when your relationships transform. The beauty of being alone is that it makes you selective. And selection is power. You stop trying to collect people like trophies. You start focusing on quality over quantity. Maybe you go from 20 fake friends to 2 real ones, but those 2 will be worth more than all 20 combined, because they're not there out of convenience. They're there because they respect you, because they value you, because they choose you in the same way you choose them. And let's not forget, being alone also filters you. It forces you to examine how you show up in relationships. Are you giving out of love or out of fear? Are you controlling because you're insecure? Or are you healthy because you've healed? Alone time is where you do that work. Alone is where you break unhealthy patterns, so you stop dragging them into your connections. Alone is where you learn how to love yourself enough to raise your standards. So yes, solitude may feel uncomfortable at first. It may feel like you're losing people. It may feel like your phone is quieter, your circles smaller, your evenings emptier. But that's not loss, that's filtering. That's your life removing the noise so you can make room for what's real. And once you've been through that process, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. Because now you won't fear walking away, you won't fear saying no, you won't fear silence. You'll know that you're okay by yourself, and From that place of strength, every relationship you allow will be one that adds to your life instead of draining it. That is the power of aloneness. It doesn't just build you, it purifies your circle. It gives you clarity on who belongs in your story and who was only meant for a chapter. So the next time you find yourself alone, don't see it as abandonment. See it as alignment. Life is showing you who matters, who doesn't, and who deserves a seat at your table. And when you finally understand that, you'll realize solitude never leaves you empty. It leaves you free, free to choose better, free to build stronger, free to love deeper, without fear of losing yourself. That is how aloneness filters relationships. That is how it gives you back your power. There comes a moment when solitude stops feeling like emptiness and starts feeling like freedom. At first, being alone feels like something is missing. You notice the silence, you feel the stillness, and it almost feels like punishment. But then something shifts. You begin to realize that the very thing you feared, the very silence you tried to escape, is the key to unlocking your deepest power. Alone is not weakness. Alone is freedom. Alone is strength. When you master solitude, you stop being controlled by the fear of abandonment. You stop being controlled by the need for approval. You stop living in chains waiting for someone else to tell you who you are or whether you matter. Alone is where you learn the most important lesson of all. You are enough. And once you understand that, you are untouchable. Think about how much of people's lives are dictated by fear. Fear of being left out. Fear of not being loved. Fear of rejection. These fears keep people in jobs they hate, in relationships that destroy them, in social circles that drain them. But here's the truth. Those fears only control you until you face them. And the fastest way to face them is through solitude. Because once you've lived through silence, once you've experienced standing on your own 2 feet and realized you didn't break, you become fearless. The world can no longer threaten you with loneliness. The world can no longer manipulate you with rejection. Because you've already stood alone, and you've seen that you are strong enough to survive it. That's freedom. That's inner power. When you know that you can lose people, lose approval, lose support, and still stand, you become dangerous in the best way. No one can control a person who has mastered solitude. Let me give you a picture. Imagine 2 people walking into a room. The first person is desperate to be liked. They adjust their personality depending on who they're talking to. They laugh at jokes they don't find funny. They agree with things they don't believe in. They need approval, and everyone can sense it. The second person walks in, calm and grounded. They don't need to perform. They don't need to chase. They know who they are, and whether anyone approves or not, they're not shaken. Which one has the power? Which one has the freedom? Always the second. And that level of calm confidence doesn't come from crowds. It comes from solitude. Aloneness gives you the space to strip away everything false, everything borrowed, everything that isn't truly you. And what's left is authenticity. Authenticity is power. When you operate authentically, you don't chase people. You attract them. You don't beg for opportunities. You create them. You don't live in fear. You live in freedom. But here's the catch. Most people will never experience this because they never give themselves permission to be alone long enough. The moment silence hits, they panic. They grab their phone. They run to distractions. They beg for company. They never sit in the stillness long enough to unlock what's inside them. That's why the few who do, who embrace solitude, who lean into it, end up so much stronger, so much freer, so much more powerful. You know what freedom looks like? It's the ability to say no without guilt. It's the ability to walk away from what doesn't serve you without fear. It's the ability to choose your path without second-guessing whether people will approve. And all of that comes from the confidence solitude builds in you. Because when you've faced your own company and found peace in it, you no longer compromise that peace for anyone. Alone is where you realize you don't need permission to dream. You don't need validation to act. You don't need applause to keep going. Alone is where you stop waiting for someone to hand you freedom, and you claim it for yourself. That's why so many of the world's greatest minds spent long periods in solitude. They weren't hiding, they were harnessing. They were tapping into a power that can only be unlocked when the noise is gone. And let's be clear, freedom doesn't mean isolation forever. It doesn't mean rejecting love or connection. It means that whether people come or go, you are still whole. You don't cling. You don't beg. You don't settle. You are free to choose relationships, free to walk your path, free to live on your terms. That is what aloneness unlocks. Imagine living without the constant need for approval. Imagine waking up in the morning and not worrying who texts you back, who follows you, who notices you. Imagine living from a place where your worth is already set, already solid, already unshakable. That's not fantasy. That's what solitude teaches you. That's the inner power you gain when you stop fearing being alone. And once you taste that freedom, you will never go back. You'll never again hand over your identity to someone else. You'll never again beg for scraps of attention. You'll never again let fear of being alone keep you in places that diminish you. You will walk with a quiet strength, knowing you are whole, knowing you are free, knowing that solitude gave you everything you thought you'd find in the crowd. So the next time you're alone, don't see it as punishment, see it as power. Don't see it as emptiness, see it as freedom, because in that silence, in that stillness, in that sacred space of solitude, you are not losing anything. You are gaining yourself. And once you gain yourself, you are free, truly free. You see, solitude is not a curse, it is a gift. It is where you find your voice, where you build resilience, where you sharpen your focus, where you filter out what doesn't serve you, and where you finally unlock the freedom to live on your own terms. Being alone is not about isolation, it's about elevation. It's about stepping away from the noise long enough to discover the depth of your own power. The world wants you to believe that being alone means you're lacking. But the truth is, the opposite. Being alone means you're overflowing with clarity, with strength, with courage, with self-respect. And when you know how to stand alone, you become unstoppable. You no longer beg for love, you choose it. You no longer chase approval, you embody it. You no longer fear loss, because you've already gained the most important thing, yourself. So the next time you find yourself in a moment of silence, don't run from it. Lean into it, use it. Let solitude build you, strengthen you, free you. Because the power you are searching for in others, the validation you are chasing, the freedom you are craving, it's already within you, and solitude is the key that unlocks it. Remember this, the strongest people in this world are not those who stand with the crowd. The strongest are those who can stand alone and still shine.